When heart is open, you will change, just like a flower slowly opening. When heart is open, you will change, just like a flower slowly opening. It's from Van Morrison. Marcus and I courted to Van Morrison, and this was one of my favorite songs. Welcome to this time together to Going Home to Another Way. I know that the text in Matthew says going home by another way, and I think that is in part what we are exploring, is how to go home by another way. And home is such an evocative term. It's the restlessness in our heart. It's Rilke calls it, he refers to God as the great homesickness we can never shake off. So going home by another way. But I suggest that we can, in going home by another way, we will find that we are going to go home to another way, to another way. I want to make a brief comment about the situation that our nation has gone through this week with the storming of the Capitol on Wednesday, January 6th. I'm going to borrow from three encouragements that John Caputo offers in his writing. Jack Caputo, as those of you who have been with me for the last several sessions know that he is my new boy toy. I borrow shamelessly from Jack Caputo, and next to Marcus, he is probably one of the most influential influences on my own thinking, and I am in the process of rethinking and reimagining and wondering anew. And I am glad that you are part of this process and journey with me. I want to mention just three things as we think about what has happened to our nation this week. And as I said, I borrow from Jack Caputo. Dare to think, and I think we're doing that in these sessions. Dare to think, dare to act, dare to hope, dare to hope. And I think that we are a people who we are confident that the future will be better. The future will be better because we are responsible. We are responsible for the future. So our hope is also based on our participation in what is possible and what we can make happen. So if there are those of us who think, oh my goodness, the future is looking bleak and it's not going to turn out the way we want, shame on us. We are the hope. So dare to think, dare to act, dare to hope. There are endless possibilities. And I suggest there's endless hope. Before we continue to get underway today, Megan, would you like to share with us? Megan McCluskey is my tech person who is helping me with all of this. And Megan, would you like to orient us a little bit to the day, or even maybe make a comment about some of the problems with getting on the session this day?
Yes, thank you. 1 second here. Hi, good morning, everyone. My apologies for the confusion this morning. Hopefully we all got it taken care of as quickly as we could. It was something that I don't think we could have tested for, and that's just the way that it is this morning. So again, my sincerest apologies. I'm just gonna go over the nitty-gritty technical stuff this morning, if you don't mind. If anybody can't hear me, let me know. But I think I should be on. So good morning. I have the slightly unsavory portion of the morning. Just a reminder to please keep yourselves muted throughout the morning unless you are called upon. And at that time, when you are called upon, we ask that you give your name and where you are from. If you do have questions or comments during the conversation, please direct them to the chat. We would like to use those questions and comments for our plenary later this morning, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. We want to use the chat space as a place for your comments related to the topic for the day. We will draw from the chat space for our plenary session, and if you want to be called upon, you can also indicate that in the chat. Before the plenary, we will give a few minutes to write and quickly catch up, if you will. We will have the plenary at the end of the presentation with Jeff Cresswell, our moderator. This will be a time to reflect on the thoughts and ideas shared by Marianne and Yarmo today. If you would like to personally connect with Marianne, we are offering a coffee time from 11 to 11:15 after the presentation and plenary. That might be like 11:03 this morning, but we'll do our best. Again, if you have any questions during the conversation, please direct them to the chat. And keep yourselves muted during this time. We're hearing little dings and things like that. I think that's going to be this morning, just messages coming in. So my apologies. Jeff Cresswell and myself will be monitoring the chat. And during the plenary, Jeff will call on you to ask your question or share your thoughts, at which time you can unmute yourself. Thank you so much for your time and space, and enjoy the morning.
Great. Thanks, Megan, so much. I so appreciate your help in all this, and we're not exactly sure what happened with the link today, but I think that people are able to come on now, and we have plenty of room for everyone, so you don't have to worry about being closed out of this session today. We do have a guest today. And I will introduce him a little bit later. There's some things that I just want to put out for our consideration today. So there are a couple of things that I want to present this morning. And then we will have Yarmo Tarki as our guest today. I described him as a robust Finn, and after you've experienced him, you will know why. Let me just say this much right now about Yarmo. Yarmo was a friend and colleague of Marcus's. And Yarmo was actually the last person outside of the family to see Marcus before he died. Marcus and his partner Anita were staying with us, and Marcus was in typical good form. He was right up until the day he died. But I remember that Marcus and Yarmo spent, I don't know, it seemed like hours to me, talking about essentialism, which I'm not even quite sure what it is. It's a philosophical construct. So they spent a lot of time talking about essentialism. And I said to Yarmo that I think that's maybe what did him in. But Yarmo and I we're very good friends, and he's been a wonderful support, and I'm delighted that he wants to share a particular perspective and understanding about religion, how we understand religion today. So I will turn to him in a few minutes. Let me begin, though, by identifying that in our liturgical year, in the Christian year, we are in the season of Epiphany. And I am taking my cues today from the season. Epiphany means that something that is hidden comes to the surface, epi on top, and then the word that we get from epiphany is something that comes from underneath and manifests. Okay, so my overall curiosity today is about what stirs us. What is it underneath our curiosities and dreams and hopes and fears and our doubts and our loves? What is underneath that moves us to try to seek a kind of meaning or acceptance of life? Okay? And so what I'm interested in bringing to our attention today is what what stirs us to seek an understanding? What's underneath that restless heart? What's underneath that homesickness we can never shake off? Epiphany also is defined as a perception, a grasping of the essential nature or meaning of things. Okay? So an epiphany, it's like you get an intuitive grasp of reality, if you will. You get a sense of the hiddenness of something that comes to the surface that we can begin to reflect on and grapple with and wonder about with more awareness. Okay? So knowing that this is the season of Epiphany, and by the way, in the Christian narrative, unto us a child is given, and in the season of Epiphany, we begin to wonder who is this person? What stirs him? And then indeed, what is it about him that stirs us? Okay. So the season of Epiphany has to do with what's underneath that is stirring, that very often becomes a call or a summons. It's something that we respond to. Okay. So I'm going to borrow again from Caputo and from who borrows from Paul Tillich. What stirs us? They suggest that the way that Tillich talks about it is that these are matters of ultimate concern. What stirs us? Matters of ultimate concern. And what are they? Matters around life and death, and birth and mortality, and finitude, our limit, and our experience of the transcendent. Ultimate concern can be about hostility and hospitality. It's about our joys and our sorrows. It's about our sense of purpose. It's about gratitude. It's about passion and compassion. And it's about justice. It's about the longing for how do we live together, okay? So the promises and the threats, both of the human condition, the promises, love, faith, hope, compassion, and the threats, our mortality, our finitude, our lack of control, our all of the uncertainties of life, the tension between the promises and the threats of the human condition, which are common to all of us, common to all of us. These are the things that stir us, that summons us, that we grapple with. And as I said, Tillich and Caputo will call those our matters of ultimate concern. Okay, so let me now talk a little bit about confessional theology, okay, which we've been calling strong theology. It's Christianity is one of those that tends to be interpreted as a strong theology with an emphasis on whatever God is, but that God is omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. There's a sovereignty about God's capacities, that this is it's not indeterminate, it's determinate. And confessional theologies tend to want to clarify their claims in beliefs and propositions and practices. And confessional theologies tend to be sponsored by institutions that claim a kind of ultimate authority. By the way, I'm not down on institutions. Houston Smith made a wonderful remark. He said, institutions give religions traction in history. Institutions give religion traction in history. Okay. So institutions are necessary, and they can be very functional and so forth. But when any confessional theology claims more than it can contain, then I think that's when we should take another look at it and ask the question, well, what stirred all of those propositions in the first place? What stirred all of that? By the way, confessional theology, Christianity, tends to be transactional as well. It's like, well, if you believe this, or you do this, or you see it this way, the benefit will be there. So it's kind of a quid pro quo. It's like, if you do this, if you believe this, then your reward is this. And of course, in very conventional Christianity, the reward is going to heaven. Okay, so the claims of confessional theology, okay, and as I said, I don't want to diss confessional theology, but I think what it calls us to, and I think that those of us who are here in these Second Saturday conversation opportunities, is that we're kind of calling the question on some of our own beliefs and some of the beliefs and claims and absolute claims of Christianity. So, so that's our reference in a way, okay? Now, let me say something about what we've been calling weak theology. And again, Jack Caputo is the one who is really helping to invite us to get our minds around that. Weak theology, which, as we have talked about before, doesn't have a lot of cachet. It's like, what good is weak theology? And if God is not sovereign, well, what good is God and all of that? Well, I actually love the term weak theology because it's so provocative, and it gets us again to ask the question: what do you mean by that? And who's defining weak, by the way? Okay, if strong theology is defining weak, but so what do we mean by this? So again, this invites our pondering. Jack Caputo said that another word that he's using for weak theology is radical theology. Radical theology, a radical hermeneutics, which is a way of interpreting. Let's, in terms of confessional theology, let's look at this again, and let's call attention to the questions and the frankly pretentious claims of confessional theologies, and those that claim to an absolute understanding of things, that they're claiming more than they really can know. And to claim more than, to say that you are more than you are, to claim more than you know, I think that's the definition of idolatry. So a radical theology, okay, and again, we'll continue to unpack this during this year, but why we call that weak, but now why we're calling it radical even root. What is stirring underneath these claims? So in a way, radical theology is a kind of point of view to get away from propositional truths and return to grappling with matters of ultimate concern. What is underneath the drives and impatient conclusions of confessional theology? What's really driving us? And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, what drives us is our matters of the human condition, matters of ultimate concern, matters of who are we anyway in the midst of all of this, and what kind of meaning can we propose or risk, knowing that we don't know, that we don't know. So radical theology, I suggest, is I'm understanding it. I'm on a learning curve, as we all are, but that radical theology is not so much about information and getting it right, okay, as if we could, but getting it right, as it is about transformation and what these stirrings and our response to these stirrings, how it affects how we truly live and truly love. Okay. Let me say that Marcus's work, I think, was addressing confessional theology. Let me just say Christianity in the conventional way we understand Christianity. That Marcus was wanting us to look at Christianity again with fresh eyes, or with eyes that are informed a little differently, or with eyes that are willing to risk a little bit more. And he was not as, for him, Christianity is not about beliefs and getting it right, okay? For him, he was more curious about what provoked the stories in the New Testament. What was it about Jesus that provoked us to tell these stories about him? Okay, and he was, as you, those of you who are familiar with Mark's work, he didn't overly claim the historicity of these stories. In fact, he would sometimes say, well, I don't know if it really happened that way or not, but he would say, and this borrows from Black Elk actually, but I know that these stories are true. So it's the question, how are they true? How are they true? And why is the story told this way? Okay. And so the curiosity, rather than trying to prove the stories, it's to ponder them. What is underneath these stories? Because it's what's underneath these stories, I suggest, that is what stirs us in these stories. And if we over literalize them, or if we absolutize these stories in a certain way, then I think that we find ourselves distancing from the very thing that stirred these stories in the first place. And that some of us have maybe lost a sense of, I don't even know if I'm really in love with this tradition anymore, because something's amiss. And I think it has to do with the emphasis on these stories meaning something absolute versus they are expressions and a kind of articulation of what stirred these early communities in the first place about Jesus in light of the human condition and the political condition and the social condition. So let me make one more move here. I may be misappropriating Paul Ricoeur, who I will mention his schema in just a second. And I may be misappropriating Jack Caputo. And by the way, he will be here to clarify his own intentions and reputation in May. So I will say more about that as the months go on, but Jack Caputo will be a guest of ours in May. Yes, I told him I was borrowing shamelessly from him, and he better hurry and come and set us straight as need be. So anyway, Ricoeur, I think I'm going to misappropriate him this morning, but there is something about a schema of Ricoeur's that I find helpful. And it's in his book, Symbolism of Evil, which I have not undertaken. It was written in 1960. He has a much more sophisticated explanation of the schema that I'm going to tell you about right now. But there's something about the schema that I think is helpful in terms of what I'm trying to get at today, which is to make some distinctions between what stirs us and moves us and summons us versus our belief system. Okay. So Megan, actually, I think we have a slide for this just so people can kind of see what I'm talking about. So if you want to just put that up while I describe this. Ricoeur suggests that that experience, our experiences, give rise to symbol, which give rise to thought. Okay, in that order. That experience, or let me borrow from Jack Caputo, that the event, and by the way, I would say that the event is what stirs us. It is what stirs and what stirs us. Okay, so that our experience gives rise to symbol, which is expressed in language, and that's determined. Symbol is very much determined by culture and by context of where the experience is being described. It's contextual, but that symbol is a way to try to express the experience that you're wanting to communicate and make more, if you will, more real, make it something that we can talk about. So an experience, which is something you can't quite grasp, it tries to express itself in symbol, which isn't the experience itself, but it kind of points the way to that, points the way to the experience, okay? And then our symbols, and there are many of them, all right? So let me be clear that a symbol is multivalent, and that there are many possibilities for how symbols reflect an experience, okay? It's just not one thing, or one symbol carries it all, which we will tend to claim in Christianity, that the one, that this revelation of Christianity is the thing, okay? It's the one true religion. And then symbol gives rise to thought, which is how we reflect on it or critique it or whatever. So Megan, you can come back to me for a sec. But that's experience gives rise to symbol, give rise to thought. I think that's a helpful schema. And let me say that when thought, and here I'm going to put in confessional theology or Christianity, which is one form of confessional theology. When thought, in its effort to express symbol, which is an effort to express experience, when thought absolutizes and defines defines boundaries and rigidity around experience and symbol. When thought becomes rigid and dogmatic, and again, claims more that it really can, claims to know more than it does, then I think that thought, it's a disservice. It's not a good mirroring or an expression of experience and symbol. Okay? And I think that radical theology is wanting to critique absolute thoughts, because what that kind of absolute thinking is doing is it's preventing new discoveries, new things, change, growth, other possibilities. It almost preempts them in their effort to claim their own certainty, okay? And that can preclude being open to seeing other things. So I think that radical theology is, it's not wanting to replace confessional theology, but it's wanting us to be more curious about what was that initial experience that gave rise to these symbols, to these narratives, to the way that we express those stirrings and that restlessness. And then thought is really, really, really helpful and can be very helpful. But when thought claims to be the thing itself, then I think that that's a category mistake, okay? When thought tries to claim that it is the experience. And I think that's what's happened to some of us in confessional Christianity, that we're made to think that the confessions about, the beliefs about Christianity is the thing. And I'm wrestling with, no, it's what brought us there in the first place, and to kind of return back to those stirrings. Okay, so that's what I'm fussing around with, and I'm inviting you to fuss around with me and help me think this through. And what do you think of this? Okay, I hope this hasn't sounded too abstract. Let me summarize what I'm fussing with in a poem. It's a wonderful poem by Yehuda Amichai, and it is called The Place Where We Are Right. Now, there are some folks who know me here in Bend, Oregon. They're familiar with this poem. I've introduced this to them before, but I'm going to read it once. And then actually, while I'm reading it, Megan, maybe you can put it up on the screen so people can see it. I'm going to read it through once, and then Megan, I'm going to unpack it a little bit so we can take it down. But this poem is I think communicates what I'm trying to get at. So here we go. Yeah, do you want to put that up? By the way, Yehuda Amichai, he's gone now, but he's a renowned Israeli poet, esteemed, treasured. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow. And a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. So let me return to the poem as a way of trying to summarize what I'm getting at. From the place where we are right. Here, it's not so much, well, I want to be right rather than you being right. It's the place where we are so certain. From the place where we are right, where we are so certain that it almost precludes considering other possibilities. Okay? So from the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. There's no opportunity for something else to either be seeded and to bloom or to make an appearance, because we've almost precluded it in our zest for certainty. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. When I think of I don't know what Amichai is referring to exactly, but when I think of a yard, I think of like asphalt or cement, okay? The place that we are right tends to be cemented by our convictions or beliefs or whatever, as though this is the way to grapple with the uncertainties of life, is to almost deny them and feel that we have some real power over them. Okay, so the place that we are right's hard and trampled like a yard. And he goes on to say, but doubts and loves, and here I don't want to say doubt so much as unbelief as disbelief. You know, if somebody says something about, something absolute, and you say, I doubt that. Okay, it's that pondering of what's underneath that. It's like, really, do you think that that's what this is about? So doubts, and by the way, doubts, I think, are the very thing that encourage faith. Faith has more to do with trust. Beliefs has more to do with a certain kind of a certainty. So a doubt can lead us to more, as I said earlier, to ponder rather than to prove. Beliefs tend to want to prove rather than ponder. So a doubt calls us to ponder rather than to prove. And that's why I think that doubt actually is a wonderful companion for faith. And the word faith really means trust. So doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow. And, moles can be a nuisance. They can kind of ruin the landscape. landscape for a while. Plows, we can have a more positive sense of that. But doubts and loves dig up the world. Our foundational ground of certainty gets dug up. It gets disturbed. It gets disturbed. And flowers may grow in the spring from that kind of disturbance. Okay. So I think that to dig up the world like a mole or a plow, that's another kind of enterprise. That's what Epiphany is about. What is stirring underneath that can bring us a better insight or grasp of the nature and reality and meaning of things. Okay. And then Amichai ends this poem by saying, and a whisper will be heard where the ruined house once stood. Now, I'm not suggesting this is what Amichai means by this poem, so I'm doing a more eisegesis here than exegesis, but a whisper will be heard. I think Jack Caputo would suggest that an event is more like a whisper than a clanging cymbal. Okay? An event it evokes, it can provoke. It's something you see almost out of the corner of your eye. It catches our attention. It's more like a whisper. So when these words of this poem, and a whisper will be heard where the ruined house once stood, where my imagination goes in the context of Christianity is, yes, Christianity needs institutions to give it traction in history. That's perfectly fine. But the house becomes ruined when the success of an institution invariably marginalizes those that it makes its distinctions about. I'm not sure I articulated that well, but the success of an institution tends to marginalize those who are not a part of it. And in that, the house becomes a ruined house. Okay. So what this poem does for me is it kind of summarizes what I'm grappling with, what's stirring in me about all of this, and what I want to say about a whisper will be heard where the ruined house once stood. There is something more to come. There is another way to look at even Christianity. There is more underneath what has moved the Christian tradition. Something has moved the tradition. Okay, we tend to look at the tradition to move us, and it does in some cases, but it's also exhausted itself in some ways. The tradition has based itself on so many things that are unbelievable that we've kind of lost the fact that no, the tradition is a response to something that was stirred in the first place. So I'm suggesting that this whisper, that there's something more. There's more to be heard. There's more to be experienced. There's more to be discovered. There's more to wonder about. And the possibilities are infinite. Okay? So we, of all people, must be people who believe in, I don't want to use that word believe, who are confident that the be better, that there is more to come. So come, okay? From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trembled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow. And a whisper will be heard. A whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. So I'd love you to just, think about some of this and how this is contributing to our seeing Christianity again and wanting to regain our sight, a new way of seeing, perhaps. Okay. So it is now a little bit past time to call on my beloved friend and colleague of Marcus's, Jarmo Tarki. And we will post his a bio of him at the end. It's after we've had our presentation here. There's a little slide at the end that'll post the readings, including the poem I just offered, my last reading for the day, and for Jarmo's bio. But let me say about Jarmo a couple of things I didn't know. That he's a sailor. A prison chaplain. He was a prison chaplain. He's been a political campaign manager, a columnist. He was a TV host in Finland. Okay, so he's been a superstar. He had 150,000 people showing up for his TV host show in Finland. I did not know that he was the chess champion of Helsinki. Okay, so as I said, he's a robust Finn. And he was also the public speaking champion of Finland. Okay, so he has quite a reputation, which is not all included on the resume, but he's a Lutheran pastor. He's an ordained Lutheran pastor who is overseeing the Lutheran communities on everything on the West Coast and beyond. He is also a fellow of the Jesus Seminar, which is called the West Star Institute. Seminar was a program of the West Star Institute. So, yeah, somebody's just come in here. So he is in both the academic world and also the world of community, pastoral concerns, the church. Okay, so he lives in both of those worlds. And he wants to present to us today a definition of religion that might help to give us a new perspective on things. And I'm hoping that it kind of fits in with what I've been talking about. I don't know everything Jarmo's going to say, but we'll see if it all fits together or if it challenges one another. So that'll be part of the fun. So Megan, it is more than time to have Jarmo Tarki, to welcome him. And I'm so glad, Jarmo, you are our first guest at the second Saturday conversation. And I'd love to know what you have to present to us today.
Thank you, Marianne. I'm truly honored to be called your friend, and of course, a friend of Marcus's. And what a wonderful thing you have going on here. And you just really made me think about a whole bunch of things with your presentation. And I like the idea of Yehuda Amikai's poem that, the way I interpret that is that we should keep an open mind, that closed-mindedness is the place where flowers don't grow. Nice. Having said that, I'm going to present you my opinions, and I know that they are right. If they were not right, I wouldn't say them. But I'm open to being corrected as well, and hopefully during the Q&A, we might get there as well. So yeah. I'm going to share the screen with you and do a little PowerPoint presentation here. Slideshow, play from start, right there. Okay, so the first question is, well, what is religion? Again, if we have very close minds, we would say, well, I know what religion is. That the word religion itself, the etymology is not very helpful. One of the ways to put it is to say that it comes from the Latin words re, ligare, again, and to bind fast or bind back, meaning the bond between humans and gods. There is no clear etymology for that particular word. But it's an old word, religio. But most of us, or let me put it rather this way, many of us are allergic to the word religion. And so I think that this is very familiar to us. We say, oh, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And that is an indication that the word religion is pregnant with meanings that many of us are allergic to. So let's see if we can define the word religion in a little bit different way that would kind of like open us to see a wider context for what the word religion may mean. It is very important to understand that how we define the word religion has ramifications. It leads to actions, it leads to thoughts, it leads to symbols, and you know, separation of people who are correctly thinking and those who are not. And so here's an example. Does it matter whether we call something religion in a certain way or a different way? So if a medical institution would define itself as supernatural faith healing, it would certainly employ practices which are an institution that defines medicine in scientific terms will reject, and we would all understand that. And we might not be very excited about supernatural faith healing medical institution, but we might be very excited about a scientific medical institution. So it has a tremendous meaning. The dominant Western religions defined religion typically as belief in God, in which the term God is understood as an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good miracle-working being. And I call this a theistic absolutism. So those omnis, the all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, which, of course, as many of us know, has tremendous problems just by themselves. Margus Borg calls this sort of religion parent theism, where we are being made children. It's what would I call it? It's infantilization of us. Imagine this: when you go to a traditional church, God is the Father, the church is our mother, and we are brothers and sisters in Christ. So there's the whole family. And what's the duty of a child? Well, the duty of a child is to be obedient. And as long as we are obedient, we are good religionists, good followers of a traditional Western religion. Now, some people find this to be very comforting and meaningful. And there's nothing wrong in being there, of course not. Religion in these sorts of institutions is exclusively, I would claim, defined as meaning that it's something about being saved and going to heaven after we die. I hear this over and over again in my congregants' talks when they say that, well, I come to church so that when I die, I can go and be with my loved ones in heaven. If you remove that, I wonder how many of those folks would actually just simply leave the church. So the church, in order to keep its finances in order, better not argue with those. However, a lot of people find this kind of religion not very appetizing, and so they leave the church. And this is what Jack Spong would then call the church alumni. And that is followed by apatheism. Comes from the word apathy and theism. Just, feeling totally, I don't care. This is what I hear from my Scandinavian friends a lot. When I try to talk about theology, they say, I really don't care. And they really mean it. And the reason for that is that they don't like this particular structure or definition of religion. Okay. Then let's look at this for a moment. Alvin Reines was my mentor. He passed away in 2004. Many of you know who Paul Tillich was. Alvin Reines was one of Paul Tillich's students in Harvard. And he grew up as an Orthodox Jew in Paterson, New Jersey, and went to the yeshivas and all that sort of traditional Jewish rituals and practices as a young man. But at Harvard, he opened up his mind, and he certainly began to see the world rather differently. And so according to Alvin Reines, here is basically, if you don't remember anything else from my talk, remember this, that religion is the human person's response to finitude, or to the conflict of finitude. Religion is the human person's response to the conflict of finitude. Now, you correctly might ask, well, what is the conflict of finitude? Well, here we go. Let me spend a few minutes with this particular slide here. A human condition is a condition where we live in a very, there's a lot of tension in our human condition. There is the finite reality, the everyday reality, and then there is the infinite desire, the desire to overcome those finite curtails and limitations. Now, psychic finity refers to the intellect. We don't really know everything. I think most of us have experienced this. I wish I would know everything, but I don't. I am very finite. Even here in my presentation, I don't know everything. Surprise, surprise, even though I'm as robust Finn, right, Marianne? Now, it also includes emotional part. We are not emotionally self-sufficient. We need other people and their acceptance to feel emotionally secure. We are very, very psychically finite. Then, physical affinity. Physical affinity means that, number one, our senses are rather limited. And here is a good example. Just think about eyesight. You have never seen a complete person, never. A complete person would be totally different than what we have ever experienced, because you always see one part of the person. We can't really see that far. Eagles have much better eyesight than we do. And animals can hear much better. Dogs can smell much better, and so forth. So physical affinity is quite clear. Our bodies are also not very self-sufficient. We need air, we need water, we need food, and our bodies are vulnerable to injury and disease. And guess what? Subject to aging. So we do experience physical affinity. Territorial affinity, the third finitude, is we don't possess everything in the world. Even the richest people in the world do not possess everything. We can't dominate events. Let's think about the events this week. We can't dominate. We can't rule. We can't rule other persons. The world is kind of out of our control. And so we feel territorial affinity. And then, of course, existential affinity that most radically throws into this bold relief. We actually expire. There is an expiration date in all of our lives. We don't live forever, and we all know that. Now, then think about the right side column here. Infinite psychic desire. It just simply means that we would like to know everything with absolute accuracy and certainty. We would like to know the meaning of God. We would like to know the meaning of afterlife. Is there one or is there not one? And we would like to feel absolute emotional invulnerability and self-sufficiency, but we don't. So there is a major conflict between psychic affinity and infinite psychic desire. Tension, tension. Infinite physical desire would, of course, mean to having perfect senses that would sense the world perfectly as it is, and that our bodies would be self-sufficient and utterly invulnerable. Isn't happening, but there's tension there. Infinite territorial desire, desire to own and rule, to control events and dominate other persons, rather clear. Infinite existential desire, that is, again, probably the most radical expression of this, to live forever. It's hard for humans to accept that this is all there is. I want to live forever. We are ephemeral beings, and ephemeral beings always yearn and long for something permanent. Permanent would be very satisfactory to us. Okay. The conflict of finitude then calls for a response. How do you solve a conflict? Well, have you ever seen two little children quarreling with one another? The way you stop the arguing, stop the conflict is by removing one or both of the children, separate them, put them into their different, go to your room. And so here too, we can solve the conflict of finitude, the human condition, which is producing all kinds of negative feelings, by either moving one or the other side of the conflict. And here we go. The conflict between finite reality and the intense desire to overcome those limitations produces negative moods that we suffer from, such as terror, despair, anxiety, and melancholy on both conscious and unconscious level. Both unconscious and conscious level. And if they remain unsolved, these negative moods corrode life's value. And here's an example. As Marianne said, I used to be a sailor too, during the summertime only, but I did go by Newfoundland in a merchant marines cargo ship, and I did see these creatures, and they are frightening. Some of them are massively large, and yet you can only see, what is it, less than 10% of an iceberg. Well, here, look at this picture. Our human condition is like an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is like our conscious mind, and the underwater part is like the unconscious mind, which we are not always aware of, but which is still affecting our everyday life. Soteria is what Reines uses the word soteria because it sounds so much more sophisticated than salvation. It's the same word. That's why scholars use funny words, because they sound much more sophisticated than what the real meaning is. The purpose of religion is to produce soteria, ultimate meaningful existence, to respond to the conflict of finitude. Soteria, ultimate meaningful existence. So when you wake up in the morning, you say to yourself, oh, it is wonderful to be alive. What a great day. The opposite of soteria is asoteria, which means a meaningless existence that arises from a failure to resolve authentically the conflict of finitude. All right, so since the conflict of finitude calls for responses, so there are several different ones. By the way, you can either think of this as responses to the conflict of finitude or responses to finitude simply. So the first set is called infinite relational responses. I know these words are kind of big and so forth, but they're actually fairly simple notions. Infinite relational response means that we say that the finite reality in which you and I live is not ultimately going to capture us, but there is a being outside of our own being, usually way up there in the heavens, that we call God, who has the authority, the ability, the willingness to give us infinite existence and all the other infinities that we talked about, the unlimited existence. Of course, this God then requires that you have to fulfill certain conditions in order to earn it, one way or the other. You got to do this, you got to do this, the suits and woods and so forth. Now, Pharisaic Judaism, that's today in existence still, as Orthodox Judaism is a typical example of this. And so is Roman Catholicism and Islam and fundamentalist Protestantism. So in this first set of infinite responses, the response comes from outside of me, from above, usually from above. The second set of infinite responses is called infinite personal response. Typically, Eastern religions would represent this, and for most of us in the West, it's difficult to imagine what that would be. But that basically means that the finite reality in which we live is actually illusory. In Hinduism, there's even a term for it. They call it Maya, delusion, illusion. That's not real. The real world is infinite. We just don't see it. And I was teaching at California Lutheran University a while back, and there's lots of Southern Baptist students, but there was also a Hindu student. And I said to the Hindu student that I had a chance to get to know a little bit better, I said, do you mind if I ask a question of you? And he said, sure. And so I asked him, are you God? And he said, well, of course I'm God. Do you believe that you're infinite? Of course I'm infinite. I have always felt that I'm God and infinite. And you should have seen the Southern Baptists react to this. They couldn't believe that somebody would say that. And for this friend of ours, it was the most natural thing to say. And he lived in the state of soteria, ultimate meaningful existence. He had solved the conflict by saying, I possess the power of infinity within me. Some of the pantheistic traditions would do this too, as well as panentheistic traditions. And Marcus Borg called himself a panentheist. So he might have subscribed to a version of this. Then thirdly, there are finite responses. Now, finite response would mean that you say that the infinite desires on the right-hand side of the slide there are, I'm ready to give them up. I don't want to know everything. I know I can't. I'm vulnerable. I'm not self-sufficient. I can't order and dominate others. And finally, I don't live forever. I accept the finite side. This is it. Now that would be a finite response. The conflict is again solved because one of the conflict parties is being removed. Now, interestingly enough, there hardly is institutional support for this. How many of us would go and sing praise songs and go to worship something that doesn't exist? It's really hard to have a church like, yeah, let's celebrate the fact that there's no afterlife. I don't know if anybody has tried that. It's probably doomed. This nonetheless requires knowledge, training, and social acceptance. Now, it's very important to know that Reines, including me too, would not claim that any one of these responses is the one and only response. And these three responses, the infinite relational response, this one, infinite relational response, infinite personal response, and finite response, are all authentic responses. In other words, they actually solve the conflict that give us ultimate meaningful existence, both on the conscious and unconscious level. But then Reines also, and I don't want to dwell too much on this, but talks about discognitive responses that are attempts to conceal the conflict. It doesn't exist. And people develop psychosis and neurosis. They medicate themselves with alcoholism or drug addiction. And of course, the ultimate expression of that might be suicide. People who leave suicide notes might write, I couldn't bear it anymore. An ultimate expression of experiencing finitude. In an Orthodox religion that we're all familiar with, and I'm not talking about the Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, I'm talking about the religion that determines that there's only one correct way to see things. In an Orthodox religion, the hierarchy, the priests, popes, councils, decide for the individual believer what beliefs are wrong and which ones are correct. I bet most of us have experienced this. The one who believes correctly is a good member, but the one who deviates from the correctness here is in need of guidance and or punishment, re-education. In a polydox religion, and the term polydox is Reines' term, meaning many beliefs as opposed to one belief. In a polydox religion, an individual has not only a de facto, meaning actual, but also de jure, meaning explicitly pronounced religious autonomy. In other words, the right to determine freely the content of his or her religious beliefs within the religious community, freedom of religion inside a religion. Now, what de facto here really means is very interesting. I have sometimes had a class of people in a church, and I asked them, well, here's a piece of paper. Can you write down what you believe God is? Now, if we had a really de jure Orthodox church, all the answers would be the same. But I have never had that happen. They're all over the place. So de facto, religious communities are polydoxies, but few of them are de jure, meaning that they would explicitly proclaim that you can actually determine the content of your own beliefs yourself. You have freedom of religion inside our religion. Then, of course, a person's religious freedom ends where another person's religious freedom begins. I hope that we would all subscribe to that one. Finally, the heart cannot rejoice in what the mind rejects as false. It's been said by many people, but I think C.S. Lewis has made it more famous, most famous. The intellect and the emotion cannot be in conflict. They need to be in balance. And Marcus said it really well in his last book called Convictions in 2014. I'm convinced that there are no intrinsic conflicts between the intellect and Christianity or religion, reason and religion. When there are, they are the unnecessary product either of a misunderstanding of religion, defining it in a not correct way, and its absolutization, or of the absolutization of a non-religious worldview. And this is what Marianne already touched in her talk. Now, some of you are familiar with this. Karen Armstrong, for example, another fellow of Jesus Seminar, has spoken about this quite a bit, and many others. The word credo, from which we get our word creed, confessional religion, comes from Latin words cor, meaning heart, where we get the word cardiology, for example, and do, to give. So credo, the etymology here is helpful because it means I give my heart to something. Now, Marianne, you didn't mention that I also fly airplanes. And when I went to flight school, it was really interesting. There were these young men, they were mostly men, who were in flight school. And the school was 5 days, but during the weekend, there was no school. But most of them would come and hang out at the airport, even during the weekend. And I said, what are you guys doing here? This is your, days off. I said, oh, no, we love airplanes so much we're here. We want to smell the engines and the fumes. I said, well, good luck. And I was mighty impressed by how much that they had given their heart to this business of flying. So original meaning of religion certainly was to give your heart to something, not to believe something, as Marianne pointed out. It's like Marcus in the slide that we saw earlier, he says that it's beyond belief, which, by the way, is really interesting because the word paradox literally means beyond belief. But of course, Marcus didn't mean a paradox, but that Christianity has, there's something beyond belief. And I think it's giving one's heart to something, be so dedicated to something. An authentic religion, the one that successfully responds to the conflict of finitude, both heart and mind are present. For Nietzsche, this meant harmony between the Apollonian mind and the Dionysian side heart. The harmony between those two aspects will create soteria, ultimate meaningful existence. Okay, and here I have my four favorite beings in the world. There is, of course, Marcus and Marianne and their animal companions some years ago in Powell Butte, Oregon. Beautiful day. Marcus was about to go for a lecture tour, and he wanted to say goodbye to his animal companions and Marianne and Anita and I. Amen.
Yarmo, thank you. A lot to look at. Let me make and I see that I'd love to do a little plenary time with people, and we only have about 20 minutes left. I want to make a comment about some of those desires that Rhinus identified, that we want to be more omnipotent, we want to be more knowing. That comes out of a strong theology construct.
Mhm.
Okay, so what kind of caught me is that some of the desires in response to our quote unquote finitude mirror strong theology. And I suggest that there are alternatives to how we respond to our finitude than thinking that we have to conquer it. One of the effects of finitude and mortality, I mean, as you rightly noted, for some people, it's just too overwhelming. The fact that, that death is too overwhelming, or that the tensions of life are too overwhelming. But there's also in the human condition, there's love, there's compassion, there's kindness, we experience a whole variety of things in the human condition. And our mortality can also affect our sense of the preciousness of life, the preciousness of it. And then what does that summons from us? Rather than being upset that we're going to die and that we don't have these, we're not Ubermenches. But then what is evoked in us when we realize, no, this might be it. And so what about the response of the preciousness of life? The other thing that came up for me in your talking is that there is so much about confessional theology and even some of the responses to our finitude that are transactional. Do this, and then this will be your benefit. My increasing sense about whatever God is not transactional. And it's like that in itself shakes the ground of our being. That if God isn't transactional, what kind of traction do we have with God? I don't think that whatever God is, whatever the event is, whatever that thing that stirs us is, I don't think it's transactional. So I think a lot of our attempts to deal with our mortality and our finitude comes out of a transactional mentality. And I suggest that there's something else. Do you have any response to that?
Well, yeah. First of all, of course, the different human conditions are experienced somewhat differently by different people. I don't think there's any question about that. For many people, the existential finity is the biggest issue. For some others, it's something else. But I also, I do recognize the fact that there are a lot of other kinds of human conditions like compassion, love, caring, all those wonderful qualities that we have. But I would suggest that they might be the results of having living in a state of soteria. If you live a meaningful life, then you can afford to be compassionate. But if you're struggling with your conflict 24/7, you don't have time for compassion. You're worried about yourself. And you were talking about experience earlier, and Marianne, you said so many things that we should talk about this for the next year. The experience that I think many of us have is that there are some people who are what we might call truly religious, authentically religious. And there is a calmness in those people that kind of shines through the peace. And there are those people who are just simply apatheistics, who don't care about religion, but have so the conflict by finite understanding, that also live in peace and harmony. So there are, and that kind of oozes out of these people, and it makes you feel good.
Yeah, yeah. Let me just say, if I understand Rhinus properly, that his contention, I think, is that we are all religious in that we all, in the way he defines religion, in that we all struggle with the human condition. So in that we are all quote unquote religious. Religions are responses to that.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And they take a myriad of forms and expressions, and that's cultural, and that's and there is no one true religion. You know, and so we make a category mistake if we say that Christianity is the true religion. It's like there are many responses to our human condition. And if I'm understanding Rhinus correctly, he's suggesting those are religions, but that deep, what I've been talking about today, stirring, is a religious stirring because it is in a response to the human condition, something like that.
And
So,
whatever is your authentic response to the conflict of finitude is really then your religion. There is, of course, the disconnected responses. A lot of people, conceal. They don't allow it to come through. And what the interesting question to ponder is that what happens to us when the traditional infinite relational response stops functioning as a vehicle for soteria.
right.
And this becomes unbelievable.
Right. And I think many of us here on Second Saturdays are in that category. It's like, you know what? It's not that we don't believe in anything. It's just that, I'm not sure I believe that.
That one, yes.
That's not quite addressing the restlessness of my heart, the homesickness I can't shake off. That's not quite addressing it anymore. And it's not to say that confessional theology or that Christianity has had its day, but it does deserve another look. And maybe to throw off the cloak of conventionalism or confessionalism or belief, throw that off in hopes that maybe, to borrow from Norman MacLean, a fish will rise, okay? Or that a flower will bloom in spring, something like that. We're getting close to end of time. I'd like to, Jeff, are there some people who would like to have a word or two?
Yeah, yes, there are.
Okay,
I will just invite those people to unmute themselves and make their comment or their reflection or their.
Normally, I would remind us of the guidelines for listening and talking, but I'm not going to take the time to do that. But let's just, be attentive to whatever the offerings are going to be now. So,
okay.
Jeff, help us out.
So Celia Carlson, I'd invite you to unmute yourself and share one of your reflections.
She's still with us?
I don't know. Celia Carlson, are you there? Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
How about Sandy Harlan? Would you unmute yourself?
I guess they're all left.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
no, Yarmo, we still have quite a few people who are
there's
hanging on your every word.
A lot of response here in the chat. Let's invite Bill Hoffman to unmute and share his response.
Hi.
Okay.
I just did a chat that came to my mind, a definition of religion as a clear comprehension of life in light of an intelligible theory. And I thought at the time that was helpful to me. So that's all I wish to share.
The only thing that I might alter with that, Bill, is in an unintelligible theory. But thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. How about Chela Sloper?
No.
Chela, are you there? You can unmute yourself.
She's
here I come. Here I am. Here I am. Sorry.
Here you are.
My computer was in distress.
That's all right. We're with you now.
Okay, hold on. I need to plug in. No, I just ran upstairs. Okay, hold on. Sorry. Okay, all right. Here we go. And then I will also.
Should we come back to you when you're ready? Or okay,
No.
you're ready.
Yeah, I'm here. Okay, sorry. So, so for context, I'm a former evangelical, and sorry, I'm still out of breath from getting my my paracord. And I don't say recovering because I don't think it was a disease that I had to somehow be cured of. For me, my earlier strong theology gave me what I call the scaffolding for building the temple of my current spiritual dwelling. So I don't regret or resent having believed that it was the precious cleansing blood of the Lamb that would wash away my sins, or that I would see Christ in the sky coming in glory. I believed those things, and I don't anymore. And without going into a long sort of circuitous path, I mean, Einstein influenced that. Reading Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel, influenced that. Having a conversation with a Sufi when I was attending Christian college influenced that. And so one of the things I put in the chat, Marianne knows this, I'm currently on staff at the Central Oregon Unitarian Universalist Church. But for me, what I think is interesting about Unitarian Universalism is that it is explicitly non-creedal. And one of the principles of that tradition is to, again, very explicitly encourage people to their own spiritual understandings. Now, it's true that we lack a scripture, we lack certain guardrails. I mean, the guardrail is love.
So if I may, it's almost like what you're saying is that the Unitarians are sort of attempting this effort to what Yarmo was saying is to sort of a religionless religion.
Either religion
in a sense.
or this is what I like to say. This is a Chelaism. We believe that belief isn't the ground of our being together.
Okay. Right.
And so all of that is to say that, and something that I said in the chat earlier as well, I think that a lot of traditional strong theology, and Yarmo was saying this, keeps us as children, and that we're not encouraged to become adults in our own spiritual comportment. So that's what I would say, is that to be human, is to go forward. Okay, thank you.
Right. No, that's great, thank you. And in a sense, yes, be adult, be responsible.
Mm-hmm.
Dare to think, dare to act.
Yes.
And then dare to hope, okay? But yes, we are responsible. And that doesn't mean that there isn't serendipity and grace and an event and the whisper that comes that changes things, but we are responsible. Yeah.
And our experience matters. And our experience
I think that's right. And I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chela.
Yeah.
I'd like
Thanks.
to invite
Maybe one more. Thanks, Jeff.
Heather Riggs.
Sure. Sorry, I was just interacting with some people in the comments. For me as a Gen Xer, I was kind of scrolling through who was on here, and I don't know if I'm the youngest person here, but I look like one of the younger people here.
You probably are. So glad you're here.
Yes, and I so appreciate your work. And
I mean, does this speak to you? Does this kind of conversation speak to you as a Gen X?
No.
Okay.
Because a lot of what you are describing as institutional Christianity is, I'm a pastor, so that's not what I do.
Right.
You know, I often repeat Augustine and say, church is a whore, but she is my mother. And what I think Augustine and what it certainly
Right, so
means to
don't talk
me,
about my mother like that.
right? What I think the prostitution part means to me is that too often the institution has gotten herself into unhealthy relationships, like the relationship she currently has with nationalism. And, you know, I as a pastor and as a younger person, what resonates with most of the younger people in my congregation is to talk about who is Jesus and what did Jesus teach.
Right.
And I am really not concerned with trying to enforce some sort of orthodoxy about heaven and hell and what comes next. You know, I'm a liberation theology person in my grounding, so I'm much more concerned in how do we follow Jesus here and now? How do we care for the least of these? How do we be compassionate? How do we love our neighbors? And
Right.
if people are interested in following Jesus, then if they're not against us, they're for us, as Jesus said. So if we're doing the same work, let's do it together. And that's how I operate in the community. And, you know, with people inside and outside of faith traditions, we can do a lot together. And I just show up as a person from within my tradition because I'm not synchronistic in my faith. I'm 100% Christian. So I show up and I quote scripture, and I encourage people to have good boundaries. And you know, I recognize that a lot of what you were talking about is defining for people who feel stuck in a toxic orthodoxy. But for me, I was like, when are you going to start talking about the ability of the institutional church to use the platform of our institution to do something better? Because I feel like a lot of people feel like they are stuck and their only option is to leave Christianity. And that's not the only option. As a Christian, as a pastor, I have an obligation we're in the middle of a reformation right now. That's the work we need to do, and we can't ignore the work of reformation for this generation, for this time, for this season, to call out that which is wrong and to lift up that which has been ignored for too long.
As Lawrence O'Donnell would say, I'm going to let you have the last word. I thank you for that. And I think one of the things that your comments reflects is people in my generation and older have had to wrestle with these questions, and they still are. And there is another way to go about this. And the message of Jesus, and I'm with you completely on this, that it's like, what stirred him and what stirs us? And let us go about the business of kindness and justice and peace. And we already have existing networks of communication in the church. So, and Marcus had a tremendous amount of confidence and hope in the church to do just exactly what you were talking about. And I suggest that what you are part of is also our future. So I deeply appreciate your comments. Let me close this time. And by the way, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Yarmo. I know that there are many who would like to respond and grapple with this, and we have exhausted our time today, but continue the conversations. And we will put on our website, we'll try to figure out a chat room or a Google page where you can continue conversation. So I welcome you to do that. in just a few moments, we will have a coffee time, so we'll have an opportunity to introduce ourselves. We'll try not to continue this conversation because it would eliminate a lot of people, but I will be, and Yarma will be available to greet you in just a moment. Our next session is the 13th of February, and I'm going to be talking about theopoetics, which is a distinction to theologic. So again, this is from Jack Caputo. So I'm going to start to sort of unpack a little bit about how we think theologically. Okay, but let me close with this reading from the Gospel of Mark. I think it speaks to what we've been grappling with, talking about, and perhaps describes the place where many of us are in terms of throwing off a cloak. Okay, Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, the blind beggar, saying to him, "Take heart, get up. He is calling you." So, throwing off his cloak, which for a blind beggar would be his security, his cover, his all he had, his protection, So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do for you?" And the blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." And Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith, your trust has made you well." And immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus, help me to see again so I can follow you on the way. Continue to stay safe and be well. And remember that life is short and we do not have much time to gladden the hearts of those who travel the way with us. So be swift to love and make haste to be kind. Thanks again for being with us. Hope to see you next time.